So hello and welcome along to another edition of Isolation Interviews for Hospital Radio and my YouTube channel. And I'm super excited to be joined by my guest today, who you may not recognise the face, but you'll definitely recognise the voice. It's the legendary Peter Dickson. Thank you for joining me.
Well, thank you very much indeed for having me on, Matthew, and how nice to be described as a legend. Sometimes I don't feel like a legend, but it's very nice to have that described to me. Thank you so much for that introduction.
Now, obviously, a lot of people out there will recognise the voice because there's so many different things, projects that you've worked on over the years. Britain's Got Talent, X Factor, we'll talk about those shortly. But, I mean, for you, how did you first come to get into voiceovers? How did you know that that was where you wanted to go?
Well, my first experience of broadcasting was in radio, and I started out as a journalist. Actually, I thought that journalism would be quite a respectable profession. I still think it is, but very quickly I realised that I was probably the world's worst journalist. I had no appetite for it, and I had I couldn't even smell a story if it was literally in front of my nose. So I answered an advert in the BBC's internal newsletter, which was for Radio 2 announcer position, and which I applied for, and to my amazement got selected. So I went up to London and had an interview at a board. They're called boards. I was interviewed by three very sober-suited gentlemen, one of whom was the controller of Radio 2, and the other one was the presentation editor of Radio 2. And they gave me a year's contract, which was fantastic. So this was back in the 80s. I had no idea about voiceover then. Voiceover didn't really exist back then. I think it was any voiceovers that were done largely by actors who kind of felt it was slightly beneath them to be doing commercials, certainly in the commercial world. But they did it because the money was quite good. Anyway, I had 10 years at the BBC. I then, during that 10 years, worked on Steve Wright's show on Radio 1, doing voiceover characters for his show. And it was during that time that I realized that I had a liking for voice acting. I could create character voices. That really interested me, and I was reasonably good at it, I think. And so at the end of the 10 years, I had been given offers, or I'd been offered work in other areas, including some freelance work. And I decided that while my 10 years at the BBC were absolutely the most fun and rewarding 10 years of my professional life, I felt that I wasn't learning anything new, so I decided to take the jump, to jump off the ship, as it were. And so my freelance career began, and it's built and built from that point onwards. So I think that's really how it started. My love with radio, first of all, and my ability to create character voices and to read other people's scripts, which is what I've always done for a living. I'm virtually unemployable in any other capacity.
I imagine that for yourself, though, it's quite nice because obviously you can go out in public and people, they recognise the voice, but they wouldn't necessarily recognise you if they came face to face with you. So in a way, it must be quite nice to kind of keep a bit of anonymity out there in the world.
Yes, it is. Anonymity is one of the key things for me for the work I do. Other people, and I don't really understand this, a lot of people crave fame and fortune. I always say, well, can we just have the fortune and see if that covers it? So I just like being anonymous. I value my privacy greatly, and I know a lot of famous people, obviously visually famous people, and I've been with them socially and out and about, and the number of times they get stopped, and the scourge of the cheeky selfie. It used to be autograph books, and now it's cell phones and everything. They want everything. They want to be photographed and videoed, and they want me to. Someone they know what I do. I always end up having to do a voicemail message for them. So again, it's part and parcel. It comes with the territory. I don't mind, but yeah, I think you're right. Anonymity is one of the attractive things of the job I do.
Now, obviously, at the moment, the world we find ourselves in has completely changed. I imagine, though, for you, because the good thing with voiceovers is that you can do it from home. So although a lot of people have been out of work, haven't been able to, get out and do their acting jobs or their, musical performances, for you, you're able to do things, although it might be a little bit different doing it from home, you're able to, just create your own space and do it. And it's stuff that you can just keep doing and doing.
Yeah, I mean, you're right. I mean, this pandemic that we're going through and the lockdowns that we've been through, they are terribly trying for everybody. However, in the world that I live in, I work in this in glorious isolation in this bunker of mine here, where I do my work. Um, I used to, before lockdown, go to London, where many of the big post-production studios are. I go to London about 3 times a week. I find myself doing anything from TV promo work to cartoons to what it may be, working on a movie or something, or a corporate video, whatever it might be. Because I work across quite a few genres in voiceover. But nowadays, and the trend is increasing with great pace, that most voiceovers now, most voice actors who are in this business work from home studios like this one I'm in now. And with the advent of high-speed internet, the transferring of files or even live directed sessions are very, very easy and possible from most people's studios now, provided you have the software and the equipment to do it, which, if you're a professional voice actor and this is your profession, this is your job, then, we all have to invest in those things like sound booths and computers and microphones and other peripheral equipment.
So in terms of obviously doing things from home and having to do a bit more yourself, I mean, have you, always been sort of quite interested in the technical side of things, or have you had to learn over the pandemic?
Well, I've always been interested in the technical side. I'm not, so I would never say or even claim to be an expert at it, but I was a very early adopter of a technology called ISDN. You've probably heard of that. And a friend of mine who's also a voice actor was slightly ahead of me, and I went along to his studio to look at it, and it was a game changer back in the 90s. Before that, we as voice actors, particularly when we were working for other clients and other radio stations around the country, we had to physically move ourselves from A to B, from here, my home, to the studio where I was being recorded. And in those days, I worked on what was called the circuit. So this was a circuit that we all drove around to all the radio stations around the country. And on some weeks I'd be in Newcastle upon Tyne, other weeks I'd be in Bristol, some weeks I'd be down in Essex. So it was a physically demanding job just from the distances you had to cover in your car. And when ISDN came along, this is the digital network that allowed us to send our voices over the telephone lines at high quality. When that came along, it revolutionized the way we all worked. We could all stay at home. It was marvelous. And most of us stayed in our pajamas till at least lunchtime. Sadly, that didn't last for me very long because I used to get very lazy and not treat it seriously. So I do tend to try and get up early and be businesslike about what I do now. But it was a nice treat just to be able to slop around for a while. But yeah, nowadays the barriers to entry for voice actors have come down in terms of the financial investment involved, and so more and more people are now becoming more actors are getting into voice acting in their home studios. In fact, there are something like 1.5 million people around the world now sitting in rooms like the one I'm sitting in, reading the words of others for money. So it's a big business. It's worth $4.5 to $5 billion globally. So lots of applications, lots of radio stations, new channels. There's media outlets are exploding. Literally, there are so many of them, and they all demand voices, and that's what we do.
So when obviously someone approaches you to use your voice, as it were, I suppose, I mean, do you get much say over the contents of the scripts, or will you just let them completely write it and then you'll obviously just do your bit? So, I mean, how's the creative process for that?
Well, it's a good question, actually. The part of the job, I think part of our job as professional voice actors is to assist with improving the writing quality. And very often, sad to say, the writing quality isn't that great. So I will always judge it on a case-by-case basis. Obviously, if I'm working for a super big, expensive campaign in London with creative directors and writers who've honed their craft, very often those scripts are so beautifully written, they don't need any intervention from me or any of my colleagues. So, but on other occasions, particularly where it's a translated script, maybe from a different language, and has been translated, as happened to me once on a huge computer game. this script came in, and it had been translated by the Russian developers using Google Translate, and you can imagine how appalling that was. So literally every line had to be rewritten by me and the producer, and it took forever. But it was if we just read it word for word as it had been presented to us, it would have been a complete disaster for the game maker, because anybody playing the game would have laughed it out of town and asked for their money back. So yes, I think we have to, as voice actors, we have to contribute to, if there's obviously something that's wrong, be it a grammatical error or a lack of punctuation, which is very often the case, then I'll discreetly add the punctuation to the script. And sometimes you have to ask the producer, is this punctuation intended this way? Because if I add a comma or a full stop here or there, it could change the sense of the sentence. So, it's a consultative process always. But yes, you're right. We have to be aware of good standards all the time.
And I imagine the other thing is, of course, is that your voice is your profession. So, I mean, do you have to kind of like train your voice? Do you have like sort of exercises you do to keep it, the way it is? I mean, how do you keep it so good?
Well, yeah, you do have to look after your voice, because it's the only thing that keeps me and my family from the breadline, and it's important to watch out how you use it. So overusing your voice is one of the worst things that you can do, and underusing it as well is one of the worst things you can do. So it's a question of keeping that balance of keeping your vocal folds nice and worked up to a certain standard. So you do that by vocal exercises before you start. So a vocal warm up, as anybody who uses their voice, including singers, they will go through a 20-minute process before they start work, where they'll warm the voice up. And not only the voice, but I also warm up the muscles of articulation. So the tongue, the lips, the jaw, and I will do even to, give myself facial massages to make sure everything is working. After all, if you're an athlete, you're not going to run the 100-yard dash without having warmed up. And as a voice actor, if I'm going into a session that's particularly demanding, maybe a video game where I'm going to be shouting a lot and projecting, then I need to make sure that my muscles of articulation are fully warmed up and my vocal folds are taut and ready to go. So yeah, warm-ups, great. And the other thing that people always say to me, well, what's the best thing to keep your voice in good shape? Do you take honey and lemon, or do you drink whiskey? Yes, I do. I do both of those, but I probably shouldn't do the latter. But I do think the only thing that really is the good thing for your voice is water, and that's disappointing, because most people want me to say I found this wonderful tincture from the Amazonian rainforest that costs £20 on Amazon. But no, it's just tap water is fine. That is the oil in your vocal engine. Systemically, you take in water, it gets distributed around your body, and one of the places it goes to is your vocal folds and all the supporting tissues around it. It keeps them nice and plumped up and ready to go. And the worst thing you can do is to become dehydrated, because your vocal folds become dry, irritable, and then if you overuse your voice with dry vocal folds, and if you're dehydrated, you run the risk of what's called vocal nodes, where the two vocal folds vibrate together at one or two specific points when it should be along the whole length of the vocal fold. And if those 2 points become irritated, then you get it's really like a burn or a blister on your vocal folds, and that affects the quality of your voice. And so you can be in terrible trouble with that. The only way to get rid of those is through vocal rest and by surgical intervention, which is not a very nice thing to have to go through, particularly as a professional voice actor, because you're going to be out of work for so long.
Now, I mean, a few weeks back, I was talking to Giles Brandreth, who's obviously very articulate himself, and really knows how to use his voice. And he was telling me that one of the things that gets on his nerves is when people they mumble and they don't really, use the English language properly. So for you as a voiceover artist, do you find that annoys you as well? You like it when people are using the English language properly and articulate so they can be heard properly?
Yes. Yes, it does irritate me greatly. I find it, I mean, I hate to say this, it's not a generalization, of course, because it applies to all age groups, but a lot of young people mumble. My son was like that. He's not so bad now, but when he was going through his teens, I couldn't understand a word he said. He just mumbled, he'd mumble, and his friends did it too. It wasn't because we taught him to be like that. I just think it's the kind of a young person's thing. But even people in their 20s and 30s, I sometimes come across people, particularly, I don't understand why, but salespeople on the phone, they ring me up and I can't understand a word they're saying because their diction, their clarity is so poor. So I get exactly what Giles is talking about. I think one of the things, if you want to be successful in life, one of the things that will contribute to your success is is good use of the English language, clarity in your speech, and a fearlessness when speaking in public. And if you can combine all those three things, and if you've got any half good ideas as an entrepreneur, excuse me, you're going to be able to communicate those ideas really well. I mean, we've all seen Dragon's Den. We've seen, what makes a good pitch in Dragon's Den. Someone who's clear, they're concise, they don't waffle, and they speak up loudly and confidently. And the bad pitches are the ones where they shuffle on, they look nervous, they make a mess of their presentation, they mumble and look at the floor a lot, and don't appear to be confident. Well, I mean, if you're trying to get somebody to give you, £50,000, it's not the ideal way to go about it. So, I mean, Giles is right. Clarity of speech, good use of the English language, and being confident go a long way to making you into a successful person.
Now, a lot of people will recognise your voice. Probably the main thing they'll know you from is X Factor and Britain's Got Talent. So for you, how did that job come about? Because obviously, I'm sure lots of people, would have loved that job as the big, the voiceover for that show.
Yeah.
So, I mean, how did that come about for you?
Well, I'd been working on a show called Test the Nation with Philip Schofield and Anna Robinson way back in 1990. I don't know when was X Factor on? It would have been, it was 16 years ago. So that series came to an end, and the sound supervisor, the guy that did the sound on that show, moved on pretty swiftly to another show, which was in pilot stage, so they hadn't commissioned it yet. And it had the working title of The X Factor, and nobody knew what it was. And they had been working on this pilot show, and I had a call from Robert Edwards, who was the sound supervisor on the show, and he said, they're having terrible trouble finding somebody suitable who could do the voiceover for this pilot. We've tried a few people, it hasn't really worked. The producers aren't happy. Do you fancy having a go? And I said, well, send me a copy of the what you've got so far. So they sent me a video copy of the show, which I had a look at. And as soon as I saw this pilot, I knew that this was a show that I could really add value to. I loved what I saw. It was a great format. And I said, I've got to be involved. So I rang the producers up and I said, look, I've got to be involved in this. This is the show for me. I know I can do this for you. Let me have a go. So I sent in an audition, as did a few other people, and within a day or two, I think it was, they rang me up and said, "Yes, you've got the job as the voice of the X Factor." Well, even then, I didn't know what it was, but I knew it was going to be a fun show to work on. Little did I realize it would become the entertainment behemoth of the decade, and go on to create some of the biggest music stars in the world, and to have worldwide success, not just in the UK, but shows be replicated all around the world, and it's still going around the world today. So it was as easy as that. I mean, I say easy. It's obviously there was a lot of work to get to that point, from my point of view. But that was one of the biggest shows I think I've worked on ever. I think, and it was a great honor to be part of.
And obviously, I think the most famous line that everyone will know is "It's time to face the music." I mean, was that your line, or was that one that they gave you? How did that come about?
No, that was one that they gave me. I don't know how it happened. I actually don't know. It just came. It came in. It wasn't from the very beginning. I think it came in about series 5 or 6, something like that. I need to check, but it arrived on my script one week, and I thought, oh, that's a new line. That's quite nice. It's time to face the music. It kind of stuck. It became the catchphrase or the opening sort of signature of the show. Yeah, I mean, these things often happen by accident. I'm sure that if Bruce Forsyth was alive today, he would tell you that all his catchphrases, just happened. They don't. You can't sit down and write them. You have to do them in front of people, and you know, good game, good game. Didn't she do well? All these lines that he came up with, and in fact, if you asked any stage performer or comedian where their famous lines come from, they just happened out of the blue. They get a reaction, and it sticks. You can't really invent them.
And obviously, working, for Simon Cowell, do you have much to do with Simon on a sort of day-to-day basis, or is it kind of quite separate?
Well, thankfully, it's very separate because he is the most demanding man. Every year he used to say to me, I want it louder, I want it bigger, I want it faster, or whatever, And so, no, we used to see each other every year, but by and large, because of as the way I described how I work at the very early stages of this conversation, I work here. This is where the X Factor was done from this booth on this microphone, and we work remotely. So they used to send me the script on a Friday afternoon, and I would record it here many times. They would get me to record 5 pages of lines. And half of them they never used because they wanted options in the edit. When they were editing the opening video, they didn't know on Friday afternoon how it was going to look. So they gave me lots of options. And then on the Saturday afternoon, when they're editing the show, they would then take out the appropriate lines that they wanted and use those. But I used to have to record loads.
And obviously, you'd announce all of the artists that appeared over the time of the show. Were there any names that you used to enjoy saying that just sort of fun names to say?
Oh, there've been loads over the years. Obviously, the one everybody remembers is Rachel Adedeji as being the most famous name of the whole load of the whole series of shows. Because it's such a fabulous name to say. It's got so many syllables in it, and it's got lots of mouth movement in it, vowels and consonants. And so I loved saying. In fact, I use her name to this day in my warm-up routine before I start work. I shout her name out loud all the time. It's a great warm-up. Rachel Adedeji. What a great name to have. The other name I really remember, but she didn't get to the show, but she was booted off the show for passport irregularity, I think it was. It was a shame because her name was Gamu Nengu. And that was one of the names that when it came through at the early stages, I was so looking forward to saying because her first name and her second name end with a vowel. So you can really elongate that. Gamu Nengu. So you can really go to town on those. I liked Mary Byrne's name because it was simple, and she was a big, busty woman who with a great sense of humour and a twinkle in her eye. And so I used to give her this kind of what I call the Roger Moore eyebrow when I did her name. I go, Mary Byrne, like a kind of suggestive rising and falling inflection. And she loved that. She thought that was very funny. And we used to have fun. And I used to enjoy going down to the studio. On the first day of rehearsals, when the contestants were first into the studio, on the first day of the live shows, excuse me, and they didn't know what I looked like. Remember we spoke about my anonymity at the beginning? Well, they didn't know who I was. So I used to enjoy going up to them, each of the contestants in turn, and creep up behind them and shout very loudly, about 6 inches from their ear, their name. And they literally jumped out of their skin. I remember One Direction when they were on the show, and Niall Horan was a great mimic. He used to do my voice, actually. He still does it very well. Great impression of my voice on that show. And Harry Styles said to me, he said, Niall does a great impression of you. I'll tell you what I'd like to do. I'd like to take you down there to his dressing room, and we'll go in and I'll say you're one of the producers or something, and we'll get him to do you in front of you, which he did it very well. And of course, Harry Styles is laughing his leg off so much that he said, well, this is actually the real guy. Poor Niall was so embarrassed.
Now, obviously, someone else who's a big name in the voiceover industry is Alan Dedicote. He's a patron for Hospital Radio around the UK. Do you guys get to work with each other? Are you guys sort of friendly in real life?
No, we actually hate each other with a passion, and he's much cheaper than I am. So he's not really a competitor at all. Um, no, he's a good mate, and I've known him for a very long time. From our Radio 2 days, actually. He was at our Radio 2 announcer when I was there with Terry Wogan, and back in the late 80s, early 90s. And he stayed on. As I explained to you, I left. But no, our paths do cross quite a lot. He lives on the same train line that I live on, so we often do live events. Not now, sadly, but when we were doing live events in town, we would also often be in town doing different live events on Park Lane. He'd be in the Hilton, I'd be in the Grosvenor House Great Room, and then we'd be a mad rush about 11 o'clock to get back to our station to get our trains home. In fact, we get the same train home. We'd often share the same carriage on the way back, which was very funny. But no, he's a good guy, and we still see each other a lot. And I mentioned him a lot in my book. Did I mention my book, by the way?
Oh, no, you haven't. Yeah, tell us about the book.
No. I've got a book. In fact, I've got it here. I want to show it to you. Do you mind if I show this
Yeah,
to you?
by all means, yeah.
It's called Voiceover Man, The Extraordinary Story of a Professional Voice Actor. And there's a picture of Alan in this, actually, I think. And I thought it's not a biography as such, but it's a series of anecdotes and stories about my professional life. And I've had many funny incidents over the years where I've met people and they've been have you ever seen Curb Your Enthusiasm?
Yes.
There's lots of embarrassing, awkward moments in my career. There's me and Alan. Look.
Oh, there we go. And I imagine for anyone who's, if they are on a train with you and Alan at the same time, that must be a very strange moment for them, hearing you guys talking to each other.
It's very, very funny. Yeah, we try and keep our voices down because, as I say, we value our privacy quite a lot. But we are sometimes we get into VO mode on the train, and I say to him, "Okay, Alan, let's release those big money balls," and he goes, "It's time to face the ticket inspector." We do get some laughs on the train. It is fun when it happens. We often share a glass of wine on the way home as well.
Now, obviously, you writing the book, that must have been quite fun for you. I mean, where did the idea for the book come from?
Well, for years and years and years, friends and family and colleagues have been saying, because I like to regale them with stories of my career, and they say, "Oh, you should write all this down. It would make a great book." And I said, I agreed. I said, "Yeah, well, it would, but I have to find the time to do it first." And I couldn't really find the time. I mean, that's ridiculous. We can all find time. I just kept putting it off because it's such an effort, and I'm quite lazy, I think. So I eventually, over about 4 or 5 years, it took to get the bulk of it down, doing it a bit at a time. And it's over 130,000 words now. It's a 300-page book. It's quite a lot. But I'm told by people who've read it, it's very funny, and which is nice. It's got 5-star reviews on Amazon now. But during the first lockdown of this year, in March this year, I found myself at home, and I thought, well, this is a perfect opportunity to crack on and get this finished. So I did get it finished. My son, who's a graphic designer, did the cover. I think he's done a marvelous job on it. And inside, I don't know whether you can, I'll show you, there's lots of little details he's put in, which is to do with our world, radio and broadcasting. And I'll show you he's done this marvelous graphic on the chapter headings.
Oh, wow, yeah.
Hang on,
So
it's not in
there we go.
Focus. There it is.
So obviously similar to the sort of the level gauge we get on our desks when we're presenting.
Indeed. And then the needle there, which would normally show you what the volume was, the dB level, actually points to the chapter number, which is quite a clever.
That's very clever.
Yeah, there's lots of little details, details like that throughout the book, and on the cover itself. The cover, you probably can't pick it out on there, but there's lots of, in grayscale, of little things in the background there with knobs and buttons on it. So, yeah, I mean, it was a labor of love. It's probably the most difficult thing I've ever produced, Matthew, because it just took so long. And getting the photographs together, I did it all myself. So it was I'm quite proud of it, actually. Quite
And is it
quietly quite proud of it.
out now for anyone who wants to go and buy it?
Yeah, it's just been published. So it's actually, if you're watching this or listening to this um, during Black Friday week, which is this week, the week we're in, and the week after, then the book is on offer. It's on a discounted rate at the moment. So it's out in all formats: paperback, hardback, the Kindle version, and other e-reader versions as well. And the audiobook, I did the audiobook as well. I was so proud of myself for doing that. That's something I'd never done. I'd never done an audiobook. So that was really a real slog to do, because if you could imagine, people say, what's it like recording an audiobook? I said, well, go into the smallest room in your house, close the door, put a chair in there, sit down, and maybe it's a cloakroom or something, and sit in there and read any book aloud every day for a week and a half. Every day, all day. And then you have to spend the next 2 weeks editing your work, and then mastering it, and then working out how to get it to Audible and all the other people who will distribute it for you. But it was a very steep learning curve, let's say.
Now, I just want to say it's been an absolute pleasure talking to you. I could continue talking for hours. But for anyone out there who's obviously stuck in hospital at the moment, have you got any messages for them while they're recovering in hospital?
Well, I do, actually. Hospital is not a nice place to be at any time of year, particularly not now coming up to Christmas. And not now during a pandemic, of course. It's very, very worrying. And I have just come out of hospital myself. 5-6 weeks ago, I was in this very studio and rushing around too much that day. I was just about to do an interview, rather like this one, for the BBC, and I tripped leaving my booth. I've got a very high threshold on the floor, and I fell over like an idiot and crashed my hip onto the floor outside and broke my hip. So I was ambulanced, if that's a word, evacuated to hospital, and where I had my hip replaced 6 weeks ago. So I know exactly what being in hospital is like, and hospital radio got me through the 6 days I was there. It was great. And the people in the NHS, of course, everybody says this, they are wonderful. It's a fantastic service. I was treated very well, had the best of everything. Can't speak highly enough of the good folks at Stoke Mandeville Hospital in Buckinghamshire, where I went. So for anybody who's in hospital today, you have my sympathies. I hope you get better soon. And certainly listening to Matthew and his colleagues on hospital radio, wherever you may be, is a great way to, lift your spirits and to feel connected to people within the hospital and beyond.
Thank you so much, Peter. It's been an absolute pleasure. Of course, keep safe. And thank you again for giving up your time.
You're very welcome. I enjoyed it, Matthew. Thank you for having me on.